Welcome to the Contractor EHS Handbook Orientation. The goal of this orientation is to ensure that all CHS and contractor employees perform their duties in a safe, efficient, and productive manner. Contractor orientation consists of the following. A CHS representative will review all specific material within the Contractor EHS Handbook and any additional environmental, health, and safety considerations. After receiving orientation, you'll be required to sign a receipt certifying that you'll abide by the environment, health, and safety guidelines in the Contractor EHS Handbook. The signed receipts must be returned to the CHS Contractor Administrator. Upon receiving the orientation receipt, the Contractor Administrator will issue an orientation sticker. This sticker signifies the contractor has been oriented on all applicable information in the Contractor CHS Handbook for the function they will be performing. The Contractor EHS Handbook does not replace any regulatory requirements applicable to contractors. It is intended to establish specific industry guidelines when performing services for CHS that contributes to CHS's commitment to following the applicable laws, regulations, and industry standards. You must keep a physical copy of the Contractor EHS Handbook on the job site at all times. You're required to follow all applicable federal, state, and local rules, as well as the requirements of the Contractor EHS Handbook at all times while working for CHS. Summaries of safety data sheets, SDSs, are located at the back of the Contractor EHS Handbook for your convenience. A full version will be provided to you upon request. Communication is critical for all aspects of EHS. You shall ensure that all contractor management and supervisory personnel are proficient in speaking, reading, writing, and understanding the English language unless otherwise agreed upon by the CHS Contractor Administrator. Based on the job task, you may be required to provide interpreters on the site to ensure immediate translation can be achieved. Entry onto CHS's property is conditional upon CHS's right to conduct unannounced searches for such contraband. Any employees who are in breach of the previous CHS rules regarding dangerous materials and firearms shall be removed. Firearms are prohibited on CHS facilities and right-of-way. You shall ensure that you and your personnel comply with all such rules, regulations, and policies. Horseplay and practical jokes are prohibited on CHS facilities and right-of-way. Visitors, including minors, are prohibited on CHS property or rights-of-way unless approved by the CHS Contractor Administrator. Unless approved in advance by the Contractor Administrator, visitors shall not be allowed to access potentially hazardous areas. Smoking is prohibited at CHS facilities, on company property, and rights-of-way, unless approved by the CHS project manager. If permitted, smoking must be designated on the work permit. You must maintain good housekeeping practices. Work areas will be maintained in a neat and orderly manner. Trash, spills, and clutter will be cleaned up. Aisles and emergency exits must be kept clean for easy passage. All wastes will be properly labeled and disposed. Roads, walkways, and unloading areas will not be blocked without CHS's approval. Suitable clothing for the job shall be worn by all personnel on CHS facilities and right-of-way. Ragged or loose clothing and jewelry such as rings, watches, necklaces, body piercing, etc. will not be worn around machinery or other hazards. Any clothing that becomes saturated with petroleum products or hazardous chemicals shall be promptly removed. Leather shoes or boots with chemical-resistant soles are required. Use of appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE, is required at CHS worksites. You and your employees must be equipped with the appropriate PPE and have the proper training. At a minimum, you must have head protection, eye and face protection, hearing protection, foot protection. All workers within the right-of-way of a public roadway shall wear high-visibility safety apparel. Apparel shall meet the Performance Class II requirements set forth in the American National Standards Institute, ANSI standard. Other equipment, such as, but not limited to, flame-retardant clothing, respiratory protection, gloves, fall protection, rain gear, chemical-resistant clothing, etc., must be worn when hazards dictate their use. All PPE shall meet the ANSI requirements. PPE is not required in offices, vehicles, or in heavy equipment with cabs. Work must be performed under the authority of SWS or Safe Work Systems. SWS may include lockout, tagout, permit to work, hot work, confined space entry, and trenching and excavation. You must be familiar with the potentially hazardous work, including hot work, confined space entry, and control of hazardous energy. Only contractors who are licensed by the applicable state may perform asbestos-related tasks on CHS facilities or right-of-way. In the event an unlicensed contractor must perform work on pipe or equipment with asbestos-containing material, such as pipeline coating, a qualified CHS employee or licensed contractor must remove the pipeline coating before work continues. CHS maintains a list indicating the lead status of facilities and will inform you of any known or suspect lead in paint or coating. You are responsible for complying with OSHA's lead standard. All waste generated shall be disposed of as required by the applicable EPA standards. All chemicals, solvents, and paints must be stored in accordance with industry practices and standards and must be well ventilated. SDSs must be supplied to CHS for hazardous materials supplied by the contractor to which CHS employees may be exposed. Containers must comply with the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard. Personal protective equipment. PPE must be provided and worn by potentially exposed contractor employees as required by the SDS and industry standards. Compressed gas cylinders shall be organized, and protective caps shall be placed over cylinder valves when not in use or when being transported. Compressed gas cylinders shall be stored upright, secured, kept away from heat, fire, molten metal, or electrical lines, and shall not be transported by mobile cranes unless secured by a carrier designed for this purpose. Acetylene or liquid compressed gas cylinders shall never be used in a horizontal position. When using compressed air for cleaning equipment, the discharge pressure shall not exceed 30 psi, and eye and face protection shall be worn. Compressed air shall not be used for cleaning clothing or parts of the body. You must evaluate each job to determine the level of risk associated with benzene. You must use respiratory protection when performing functions where benzene exposure is possible, such as tank draining, cleaning, pipeline draining, etc. If you're exposed to 1 ppm or greater of benzene, you must immediately leave the area and not return unless you are wearing a NIOSH certified respirator or the exposure has been eliminated. You must evaluate each job to determine the level of risk associated with hydrogen sulfide, or H2S. CHS personnel will help determine the level of protection required. Monitoring equipment such as multi-cell gas detectors and personal monitors may be required. If you're performing work where there's a risk of H2S exposure, you must adhere to all applicable regulatory requirements and CHS guidelines. If you do not have a written confined space entry program that is compliant with the OSHA standard, you will not be allowed to perform tasks in confined spaces. The CHS Pipelines and Terminals EHS Department will review your rescue provisions. Based on the review, the EHS Department may choose to provide rescue services during entry operations, including entry into an internal floating roof tank. If you're going to be working in or around confined spaces, your CHS contractor administrator will go over these provisions with you in detail. All electrical equipment must be kept in serviceable condition. Under no circumstances shall defective electrical equipment be used. Only qualified persons using the proper PPE and work practices as specified in NFPA 70E. There are specific guidelines for working with ground-type portable equipment, ground fault circuit interpreters, hazards, flash protection, and PPE, and overhead power lines. If you're working with or around any of these items, you must be familiar with and adhere to the applicable regulations and industry standards. You must communicate with CHS regarding your respective procedures when engaged in activities which are covered by OSHA's LOTO standard. The CHS contractor administrator will assure that the CHS's authorized person is aware of your energy control program. If you are a single employee contractor and are accompanied by CHS personnel, you may rely on LOTO initiated by CHS. If you are a full-service contractor, you are required to participate in the LOTO procedure. CHS will initiate LOTO, and you must LOTO over CHS unless other provisions are made. You shall assure that there is only one authorized person for each job. If you must perform LOTO work, you must comply with all CHS policies and guidelines pertaining to this work. Flame and spark-producing equipment around flammable and combustible materials present a substantial hazard that can cause personal injury or death. Fire and explosions may cause equipment damage, resulting in downtime and economic hardship for CHS. Special provisions are required when performing hot work in confined spaces. Where applicable, equipment shall be blocked in or LOTO'd and must be free from flammable liquid and vapors, 0% LEL, as far as practical prior to beginning the hot work. If you'll be performing any hot work, you must be familiar with and adhere to CHS's policy on hot work, including but not limited to the following: hot work permits, vehicle and heavy equipment entering a tank dike area, fire watch, and atmospheric sampling. When dealing with overhead work, the area below overhead work shall be roped off, and other equivalent measures must be taken to protect workers on the site. Personnel should never pass under a suspended load. All scaffolds shall be constructed, maintained, and used in compliance with the applicable OSHA standard. Scaffold shall be inspected and tagged by a qualified person prior to use. Fall protection must be worn when the scaffold has not been erected to meet the standards. Warning devices shall be used when performing work on and near the roadway to warn motorists of your presence. Refer to the Contractor EHS Handbook for the level of protection needed, including the type and amount of warning devices required based on the type of roadway. Minimum warning devices are required in the following areas: Class 2 reflective vests, vehicle lights, signs, flags for directing traffic, barricades, cones, road closure. When moving heavy equipment along roadways, proper use of spotters are required, and you must be watchful of overhead power lines. Fall arrest systems must be worn when working above 6 feet above a lower level. The fall arrest system must be designed, installed, and used in accordance with the applicable OSHA standard. You are prohibited from accessing the ladder and the top of the storage tanks unless your work requires access and permission is granted. You must remain within the confines of the catwalks that are equipped with hand and mid-rails. If you are required to gain access onto the top shell of the tank, the company will evaluate the integrity of the rooftop, and fall protection must be worn as required by OSHA. Fall protection must be donned prior to opening access doors to internal floating roof tanks. If you must enter the area inside external floating roof tank tops, you shall test, sample, and continuously monitor the atmosphere during the entry and during the time workers are present in the affected area. Internal floating roof tanks are considered to be confined spaces. Specific health and safety guidelines are covered in the Contractor EHS Handbook. These guidelines include the following: brush cutting safety includes mowing, trimming, and weed eating; tank sandblasting and painting; vacuum and water trucks; monitor wells; soil boring, drilling, geoprobing, and sampling; weed spraying; pipeline installation contractors; crude transporters; storage tank cribbing, and anti-rotation. You shall immediately report to the CHS contractor administrator any unsafe conditions and near-miss incidents that could have resulted in any injury or equipment damage. You must also report all significant environmental, health, and safety-related accidents or incidents regardless of the amount of damage, if any.
Yeah. Hey, Tim.
CHS's goal is to provide a workplace free of personal injury. Injury prevention requires everyone's effort to eliminate incidents that may cause personal injury. Detailed reporting and classifications of injuries are discussed in the Contractor EHS Handbook. Contractors must also provide copies of all reports related to these accidents and incidents to the company. The goal of this orientation process is to ensure that all employees, CHS and contractor, are informed and able to safely perform their job responsibilities and return home safely each night. Thank you for your help in ensuring the safety of each and every employee.